In this A2 revision screencast, I'm going to take you through a brand new resource that I've developed that just might be the key to helping you memorise the key concepts, the key terms for the A2 Sociology papers. And these new resources are called Key Concept Knowledge Organisers, and in this particular video I'm going to show you where you can find these resources and also show you how you can use these resources effectively to make your revision as good as possible. Before I show you the resource, let me briefly explain some of the cognitive science that lies behind the development of these resources. And the research seems to suggest that some of the most common revision techniques that students tend to use are actually quite ineffective. So simply rereading your notes and perhaps rereading them with a highlighter pen, these techniques have been proven to be actually quite ineffective. And that actually the research suggests that there are basically two forms of revision that seem to have the biggest impact on memory. So the first technique that's been proven to be effective is active recall. And this is basically about testing yourself all of the time, finding ways in which you can test whether or not you can recite your knowledge, then identifying gaps in your knowledge, doing a bit more study to plug the gaps in that knowledge, and then repeating the process of testing yourself again. And the use of things like flashcards and constructing mind maps for memory are two good techniques for facilitating active recall. So finding ways in which you can constantly test whether or not you can retrieve your knowledge is much more effective than simply rereading and highlighting. The second technique that's been proven to be very effective is disruptive practice. And this is the idea that we shouldn't binge on revision. Instead, we should break revision down into short sessions that we repeat on a regular basis. For example, let's imagine that you were trying to learn how to play the guitar. Rather than doing all of your practice in one big chunk, let's say on the weekend, so maybe you've got 3 hours of spare time to spend learning the guitar in a week, and you're going to do all of that 3 hours in one block on a Sunday afternoon. Actually, rather than doing that, it would be much more effective and have a much bigger impact if you space that 3 hours out into smaller chunks during the course of the whole week. And the same principle applies to revision. If you're going to be doing, let's say, 2 hours of revision each evening in the run-up to your A2 exams, rather than doing a solid 2-hour chunk on sociology, it would be much more effective to break that 2 hours down into 3 40-minute chunks with a short break in between each one, and to alternate the topics that you do. So either do different topics within sociology, or do one session where you're working on memory, another session where you're working on skills such as planning exam questions, or to mix up different subjects. So to do 3 40-minute sessions but of different A-level subjects. So I've been developing some new revision resources called Key Concept Knowledge Organisers to help you apply these two revision techniques that we know to be the most effective. So what you can see on the screen at the moment is one of the knowledge organisers that I've created for the SY3 unit on political sociology. So we can see in this section the key theme is power. This is the name of the screencast that these particular concepts are taken from. These are obviously the key words that you need to learn, and here are explanations, definitions of these key ideas. And you'll notice that when a concept is particularly associated with a key sociologist, I've also included that as part of the explanation, because learning the names of key theorists is also an important part of your revision. The other thing that I've done to help you with your revision is where a term is actually used in the specification, I put an asterisk by it. And it's particularly important to learn these particular concepts thoroughly, because it would be perfectly legitimate for the examiner to use these keywords in the wording of the questions themselves. You know, we can have no complaints whatsoever if we open up an exam paper and we see terms used in the question that are taken directly from the spec. So these are the ones with the asterisks. Now, if you've missed the revision lessons this week and you've not got paper copies of these knowledge organisers, you can find copies of the knowledge organisers on iLearn. So if you click on these exam skills sections, this is where you'll find the knowledge organisers. At the moment, you'll find 3 knowledge organisers that cover all of the key concepts for the SY3 exam. And if you check iLearn in the next 2 or 3 days, you'll find that the SY4 knowledge organisers will also be added to iLearn. So if you click on this particular button in iLearn, you'll gain access to all of these revision and exam skills resources, and we can see here you've got the links to the 3 knowledge organisers that I prepared for the SY3 unit. So this first one deals with the themes of power and democracy. The second one looks at key concepts to do with the role of the state. And the third one looks at political participation. Now, going back to what I said about effective revision, we can use the knowledge organisers to facilitate this really effective revision strategy called active recall revision. So once you've studied a particular topic, rather than simply rereading your notes, you need to test yourself, and this is where the knowledge organiser can aid that process of active recall, because you can simply cover up the definitions and the explanations and the key names, and you can test to see what you can actually remember. So we can simply cover up these definitions, think about what we think is the correct answer, and then compare what is in our head with the correct definitions. Now, going back to the second revision technique that I talked about, this idea of disruptive practice, one of the really mysterious things about memory is that we need to build in some time to actually forget stuff before we go back to it. So when you're doing this active recall revision, try to space it out. So test yourself and then come back to that material maybe the next day, and then leave it for a couple of days, and then come back to it again to see what you can actually remember. And remember, as I said earlier, don't revise in one big block. You know, don't try and do 2 hours or 3 hours on the same topic. Try to break it down into smaller units and alternate what you're revising in terms of subjects, topics and skills. Of course, you can use the knowledge organisers to also identify which screencasts, which PowerPoints from iLearn you need to go back and review. So you can use it as a checklist to identify what things you are least confident about. In fact, a good strategy with the screencasts in terms of revision, let's say you're going to do a 40-minute revision session on sociology before you have a break, what you could do is decide to focus on 2 topics. So with the first topic, you can go back to the screencast, spend about 10 minutes re-watching that screencast, and then move to the knowledge organiser and assess whether or not you can actively recall the main concepts from that screencast. Then you can move on to a second topic and repeat the process. So watch the relevant screencasts, they're usually about 10 minutes, and then use the knowledge organiser to see whether or not you can actively recall the key concepts from that particular video. And obviously, if there are still things that you don't understand, then please ask me for extra help. So you can still come into college next week if you want extra help, or you can email me. And then finally, another way in which you can use the knowledge organizer to improve your revision and exam prep is you can use them as a reference when you're planning or answering practice questions. Remember, in terms of revision, it's not just about memorizing content, it's also about mastering exam technique, and you need to get lots of practice at decoding and planning practice questions. And having this knowledge organizer in front of you will help you to identify some of the key ideas that you want to include as part of your plan. So I hope that you find these knowledge organisers useful. I hope that you use them in a way that we know to be effective through active recall and disruptive practice. And you're going to find that there's nothing new in these knowledge organisers. I'm not giving you new stuff to learn at this late stage. It simply covers, hopefully in a really comprehensive way, all of the key concepts from the screencasts, from the lessons, in a format that will hopefully enable you to revise really effectively using the method of active recall.